Hello, I'm Alex Davies, founder of Wealth Club, and today I'm with Simon Penson of Hatch Ventures to talk about the Hatch SEIS fund. Hi Simon, tell me first off about Hatch and also give me some background to yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you for having us on, first and foremost. Hatch Ventures, for those that don't know, we're relatively new in the market in real terms, I guess, but have been very busy in that time. Is the ventures arm basically of a business that actually started in 2013 as an angel investment business and workspace business. And started originally by Scott Weavers Wright and Fred Sanea as an angel business, and I had got to know them through that period of time. I'd been building a business in digital, and we got to know each other. And over between 2013 and 2018, we were talking a lot and kind of sharing ideas about how our visions were seemingly pretty similar around early stage investment and why we felt it was slightly broken. And very organically that became a kind of a formal partnership in 2018, where we launched Hatch Ventures properly and started looking for external investment. And from then on in, we launched a EIS fund in 2018. That's gone very well. We have several funds under management now, and we launched SEIS for the first time this year, which has been very, very, very successful. We've almost completely and utterly fulfilled that now already, with sort of 12 investments to date. We look for 10 to 15 per fund, and we're going to be launching another one imminently. So.
And what sort of companies are you looking for?
We look for digital disruptors. Is probably the best way of describing it. We're a very hands-on team, and we therefore want to feel like our backgrounds and experiences can add value to the businesses that we go into. So that really does mean that we're all digital people within a kind of very eclectic range of skills, but we really want to feel like we can help those founders get to seed and beyond. So we look for digital disruptors, founders with really compelling stories and visions in all kinds of B2C and B2B spaces, but it's technology backbone kind of businesses.
And do you want to give me some examples of companies that you've invested in recently?
Yeah, of course. So on the SEIS side, so we've obviously deployed quite a lot very recently from the first fund, but a couple of very recent ones that I found really interesting. One is called BetMate, and it's a kind of an app-based business launched by a couple of really super smart guys who have had a kind of really compelling vision, having worked in the gambling industry previously, to kind of reinvent the whole world of fantasy sports a little bit. It's huge in the US, quite big here, but they're doing it so rather than betting against the bookie, you're basically betting against your mates. So there's a huge amount of gamification in that business, and a really exciting roadmap for where they are, because it won't just be football. And they're just two really, really energetic kind of guys that have absolute clarity of vision, and I can see that business doing really, really well. Engagement has been fantastic since they launched MVP, and they're going to be raising seed very soon. So a pretty significant increase in valuation, which is great. And then another one is a business which it's really exciting, but it's also relatively difficult to explain actually in real life. So the best way that I can think about it is actually if I tell you where they're coming from with the problem. And the business is called Orbital Chat, and they realised, because we talk to founders and we look for pieces of insight, unique pieces of insight that is kind of they've been led to by kind of their earlier careers. So they're coming at a problem that very few people can solve because of their experiences, and that's very much where Orbital Chat came from. And what they're looking to do really is better support remote working, because as we'll all know, the world knows that working remotely and just being on and off Zoom all the time, culture disappears. The kind of the water cooler moment disappears. And they've created an always-on platform that kind of sits on desktop and can be full front of screen, or can be tucked away somewhere on your desktop, that allows you to kind of always have audio only on. So it's a revelation actually, audio only, because when Zoom is on, you're staring at a camera and it can be very tiring. So actually audio only is a wonderful thing, and it's spatially aware as well. So you can basically move yourself and sit on a metaverse desk, so to speak, over here and have nobody around you and hear nothing. Or you can move into a group or a meeting or a one-to-one and actually be really close to those people. So it means that kind of, the bit of the office that you missed the most, the noise, the background, the individual conversations can still happen even when you're remote. So very exciting business, and again, they've seen really good early traction and will be raising seed soon.
You and the founders of Hatch have made other SEIS investments. How are they doing?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you're right. The SEIS is this year, so we can't talk too much about traction and history, can we? But what we have certainly done in the past is we have invested either in SEIS through our Angel brand, and also actually we've kind of taken allocations of SEIS through our EIS fund. A couple of examples, one of each of those. So very early on, we backed a business called Buy.me, which is kind of Deliveroo for supermarkets. At SEIS, so very early, they've continued to grow and grow. Obviously, the pandemic has really helped. And as a result of that, they're now looking at a very significant kind of Series A, B round that's going to be, price them sort of £60 million plus. They're growing like a steam train. So that's a really good example of an SEIS that has continued to do very well. I mean, we've invested from sort of £2 million valuation there, so that's done really well. Another good example of that from our EIS fund, because obviously EIS, yes, of course, takes some EIS allocation, but we have previously not had SEIS, but we've still taken, the SEIS level. There's a business called AeroCloud, which is a really, really exciting business that's basically reinventing how airports run their kind of operational platforms and systems, because a lot of that is kind of very antiquated, and lots of very old enterprise businesses in that space, and they're coming along with a cloud-based offering that's really upsetting the apple cart. And that business has really, really done very well, despite the challenges actually of the pandemic. They've used it to actually gain foothold because they save the airports lots of money. And we can see that going for a Series A very soon for a very significant number. So a couple of examples there, I guess, of the fact that, despite the fact that we are early in SEIS, we kind of have been in it previously in different modes. So yeah, a couple of decent examples.
And how do you find these businesses?
We see a lot of businesses now. We see probably around 700 or more decks a year, and a lot of that really is because even though the SEIS fund is only this year, actually we're 8 years old as a business, as an angel business, and we're slowly growing a reputation, I think, with founders, which is the critical part of early stage, because we are founders. We've been there, we've made the mistakes, we've bought the t-shirt, and as a result of that, I think founders really are compelled to come to us with the challenges that they have to see how we can help them, not just with money, but actually genuinely rolling our sleeves up, because we help with everything from fundraising strategy to go-to-market strategy to growth marketing, you name it, we can help. And I think that value add is really important. So we see a lot of really interesting deals because of it. And I think on the fundraising side, we don't charge the companies money when we invest in them, and I think that also is, quite attractive to them. So I think the combination of those two things and the fact that we've been doing it for 8 years, we see a lot of inbound. So it's more of our challenge is diluting that back down, if that makes sense.
And with the SEIS, how do you ensure you find decent companies? Because it's very much, these companies are so young, you have to choose quite a lot, and also the amount of money you're allowed to give them under SEIS, you burn through that very quickly.
You do. And I think it's for that reason that, and I mentioned this earlier, that because you're inherently investing in people at that stage and visions. Often there will be an MVP or an early MVP that we can look at, and kind of kick around a little bit. But you're right. You have to spend a lot of time really understanding the motivations of those people. And I think the benefit that we have is that, again, we've been there as founders and we know what it takes to win. Yep. So you're looking for a resilience, as well as a compelling vision that, these guys and girls are running at 100 miles an hour. That's really important to us. And then we spend a lot of time actually, in kind of looking at the general market, the competitive nature of that, and the runway, of course, as you mentioned, because 150k doesn't get you very far. They have to be able to get to a point at which it's compelling enough to raise a seed, which will give them, a decent enough runway. But that said, we still look to try and make sure that any round that we invest in gives them sort of 8 to 10 months of runway to allow them to make that enough difference to actually raise a decent sized round. So,
and is there a typical failure rate you're expecting?
Yeah, look, people hate failure, don't they? Particularly when they're investing in it. And we invest our own money in the fund. It's really important to say that. I think we've got circa 20% in the fund, which is I think hopefully a sign that we're backing, putting our money where our mouth is. But look, failures are going to happen, particularly at SEIS level. Yeah. And if we look back because we've been angel investing in SEIS for 8 years, individually but kind of collectively, and we've seen a kind of 90% success rate, if that makes sense. We like to be half full rather than half empty. But I think if we can see 9 out of 10, becoming successful in the longer term, then I think we'll have done our job.
And clearly it's too early for the SEIS to have had any exits. Has your EIS funds had any exits, or other companies you want to talk about which are promising?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the good news is there are lots. But no, the part challenge we do have is that we are still relatively early, even on the EIS side, because we've been in that since 2018. But that said, we have actually a couple of exciting kind of M&A conversations with a couple of portfolio companies at the moment. Whether they end up being something or not, we don't know. But I think it's very much a proof of concept that the companies are interested in acquiring them. So we could have some exciting news there imminently, I think. But actually, on the kind of the SEIS side, the very fact that we're seeing valuations in the 2 to 10 times already based on previous round to seed round, I think gives us enough confidence that we're kind of heading in the right direction. But yeah, we understand the importance of exits. We want them. It's our money as well.
Of course, you have had exits as a team yourself.
We have, yeah. So I previously built, or my last business was the one with a digital agency that we built up to sort of 200 people, 3 offices, and sold to Interpublic Group in 2016. And obviously, Scott and Fred have had a very significant exit in selling kittycare.com for £70 million cash. So we kind of know that whole journey from, whether it's bootstrapped or raising money, all the way through the trials and tribulations of almost falling over and, getting there eventually. And I think that's a really compelling thing for the founders that we invest in, because they don't have to trip over the same holes that that we did for so long, and so they can get there faster, which I wish I had that, if we put it that way.
And when would you expect people to start getting money back?
Well, as we said, I think we're not in control of the market, but we can certainly help with growth, and we have 2 very interesting companies in M&A at the moment. Those processes can take several months, as you and I both know. But
what would be the typical period if you were looking forward?
I mean, we look at, we're eyes open to the fact that this is a medium to longer term investment at SEIS and EIS, because you're investing earlier. You're getting more value, but it is a longer term investment. So I would say, we talk about sort of 3 to 5 years being, kind of mean. But in reality, we can expect 7. We have some angel investments that are coming up to 7 years now, that are close to, being exited. But that is a reality, and I think people going in, it's important that they realise that these things can return significant multiples on your money, but you do have to be patient with them.
Finally, to sum up, for someone who wants to invest in an SEIS this year, why should they consider you?
Good question. I think there are a few reasons. The first of which, and we've talked about this already, is the fact that we are founders ourselves. We have been there and bought the t-shirt, and I think particularly for early stage, which SEIS is the perfect example of that, those founders really need it, because they are people with a great grand idea, yes, absolutely loads of enthusiasm and energy and probably an MVP, but not much else. And we have been there in that position, and we understand and can support across go-to-market, marketing, product roadmap, fundraising strategy, all of those things, so that they can move faster, not break so many things. And of course, because of our reputation through that, through having been investing for 8 years through Angel, we see a lot of companies. So we're seeing more than 700 a year now. So we're able to kind of sort the wheat from the chaff. So we're getting very good quality inbound because of the fact that founders know that we can help them. And then of course, and because we're not charging the companies money, which I think is also important, because that can be very off-putting for them when they're raising money and they haven't got a lot of it. So they can really put every penny of that to work. So I think for those key reasons, lots of others of course, but I think if people were to take something away, that would be the really key one for me.
Simon Penson, Hatch Ventures, thank you very much.
Thank you.